They say a house remembers what was buried beneath it. The Dawson house stood silent on the edge of a dying town in Kentucky, its white paint long stripped by decades of wind, rain, and something older, something that seemed to breathe beneath the foundation. Locals said the walls moaned during storms, that the air inside turned cold even in summer. But no one ever stayed long enough to find out why. When the last of the Dawson bloodline, a man named Thomas, returned to the property in 1982 to claim his inheritance, the town whispered like the dead had started talking again, because everyone knew what the Dawsons had done to build that house. They just didn't talk about it. Not after what happened the first time someone tried to dig too deep. Thomas had never known his family. His parents were gone before he could remember. All he had was a deed, a key, and a warning written in a letter that had yellowed with time: "Do not disturb what's underneath." At first, he thought it was a figure of speech, some poetic echo from an older generation. But when he crossed that rusted gate and stepped onto the porch for the first time, something shifted in the soil beneath his boots, as if the ground itself recognized him. The locals said the house had been built in the 1800s by Joseph Dawson, a man who came to Kentucky chasing coal, wealth, and the illusion of God's favor. But before he laid the first brick, the land had already been claimed, not by law, but by the dead, a burial ground, a forgotten resting place for the earliest settlers and the enslaved. When Joseph found bones in the soil, he ordered them thrown into the river. From that moment, the land began to change. The grass stopped growing, animals went missing, and those who built the house, one by one, began to die strange, slow deaths. But Joseph didn't stop. He finished the house, moved his family in, and raised his children beneath the curse he had created. And now, a century later, Thomas had returned to it, unaware that some debts never expire. The house had been waiting for him. Thomas Dawson wasn't a man who believed in curses. He was a practical soul raised by the foster system, hardened by the kind of loneliness that makes you stop believing in ghosts or anything that doesn't bleed. When he first stepped through that front door, all he saw was decay, wallpaper peeling in curls, the scent of damp wood and mold, floorboards that groaned like something shifting beneath them. The air tasted metallic. He thought it was just rot. But rot doesn't whisper your name. The first night, he slept in what used to be the master bedroom. Moonlight spilled across the cracked window panes, cutting pale lines over his bed. Sometime past midnight, a sound woke him, a slow, dragging shuffle across the hallway. He listened, heart hammering, waiting for it to stop. But it didn't. It paused, then started again. He called out. Nothing. The air felt thick, and for a second, he thought he heard a voice, faint, almost childlike, calling back. The next morning, he found footprints in the dust outside his door. Bare feet. Small ones. They led down the stairs and disappeared near the old parlor, where the floorboards sagged lower than the rest. He told himself it was just his imagination, maybe raccoons, maybe wind. But when he went to sweep them away, the prints were warm to the touch. He spent the next few days exploring the house. Each room told a different story of neglect and silence, portraits with eyes scratched out, family photographs with faces cut clean from the frame, a Bible still open on the table, its pages warped by moisture but turned to one specific verse: "The ground shall no longer yield her fruit." Thomas started to notice patterns. Each night, the temperature dropped sharply after midnight. Each morning a new door would be opened that he swore he had closed. He found a cellar door under the parlor rug, locked shut with 3 rusted chains. He didn't remember seeing it before. And on the 4th night, the whisper returned. This time closer. Inside the room with him. It wasn't angry. It wasn't pleading. It was something worse. It sounded like someone remembering him. By the 5th day, Thomas could no longer convince himself that the house was just old. The sounds weren't the creaks of settling wood. They were deliberate, timed, rhythmic, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. When he pressed his ear to the boards, he swore he heard breathing, slow, patient, and human. He tried to focus on restoring the place, distracting himself with work. He cleaned the kitchen, fixed a broken window, replaced some of the light bulbs. But the lights wouldn't stay on for long. They flickered, dimmed, then cut out completely whenever he stepped near the parlor. And every time he turned them back on, something in the room had moved. There was an old mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. He straightened it once, twice, but every morning it leaned a little more to the left, as if resisting him. When he finally decided to remove it, the wall behind was darker, stained in the perfect outline of a human hand. That's when he began to dig. He remembered the letter's warning, "Do not disturb what's underneath," but the cellar door called to him like a splinter in his mind. It was the only place left he hadn't explored. So one evening, after the sky bled into twilight, Thomas pried off the chains and lifted the hatch. A foul wind exhaled from the darkness below, cold and damp, carrying the smell of rusted iron and wet earth. He climbed down slowly, flashlight trembling in his hand. The cellar was larger than he expected. Stone walls, slick with moisture, wooden beams half rotted through. In the far corner, something glimmered faintly beneath the dirt. He knelt, brushing the soil away, revealing bone, human bone. Dozens of them, packed together like a forgotten offering. Thomas stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. But then he saw something else, a small wooden box, buried half in the wall. Inside was a stack of brittle photographs, their edges blackened with mold. The faces were unmistakable, the Dawsons. Generations of them. But in each picture, someone's eyes were burned out, and in the final one, dated 1863, the man standing in front of the finished house looked exactly like Thomas, 120 years apart. Same face, same house. He dropped the photo, and when it hit the floor, something beneath the dirt laughed. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He sat in the parlor with the lamp burning low, staring at the cellar door as if it might open on its own. His mind ran in circles, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. The bones, the photographs, the man who looked like him. He told himself it was a trick of the light, some coincidence buried in the Dawson bloodline. But deep down, he felt something watching him, not from outside, from within. The next morning he went into town. The locals were polite, but their eyes followed him wherever he went. When he mentioned the house, conversations died mid-sentence. An old woman at the diner muttered something he couldn't quite hear, then whispered to her friend, "It's starting again." He asked the librarian if there were any records about his family. She hesitated before bringing out a thick, dust-choked ledger from the back room. Inside were death certificates, dozens of them, all Dawsons. The causes varied: fever, accidents, drownings, suicides. But the pattern was unmistakable. Every generation had lost someone young. Every 20 years, the family line thinned. And always the deaths began after someone returned to the house. The librarian looked uneasy. "Mr. Dawson," she said quietly, "you shouldn't be there alone. That land was never meant to hold the living." He left the library shaken but unwilling to leave. Something inside him, curiosity, pride, or maybe something older, kept him tied to that cursed soil. He had to know why. That night, he went back into the cellar with a shovel and lantern, determined to dig until he found the truth. The earth was soft, damp, and full of bones. As he dug deeper, he began to notice patterns carved into the stone walls, circles, crosses, strange symbols that pulsed in the flickering light. And then, beneath the dirt, he found a wooden plank floor. He pried it open. What he saw beneath wasn't a grave. It was a room, smaller, darker, hidden from every record and every story. He dropped into it, lantern shaking, and saw the outline of another door at the far end. On the door, carved deep enough to bleed the wood, was a single word, "RUND." And the whisper came again, closer now, almost inside his ear. "We've been waiting." The door wasn't locked, but when Thomas tried to turn the handle, his hand began to tremble uncontrollably. The wood felt warm, alive somehow, pulsing faintly beneath his fingers. He hesitated, every instinct screaming to run, but curiosity has its own gravity, and it pulled him closer until the latch clicked open. Inside was not what he expected. No bones, no crypt, just a small, earthen chamber lit faintly by the reflection of his own lantern. The walls were lined with crude carvings, hundreds of names scratched into the clay. Every one of them ended the same way: Dawson. He ran his fingers over the markings, tracing dates that stretched back centuries. Many were written long before Joseph Dawson was even born, and at the very center of the chamber stood a single object, a chair. Old, wooden, bolted to the floor. Around it, the earth was blackened, as if something had burned there long ago. He crouched beside it and found a rusted set of shackles nailed to the arms. Beneath them, a small brass plaque, tarnished but still legible. It read, "For the one who must atone." He stumbled back, the lantern shaking violently in his hand. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but something deep in his chest, something inherited, did. He could feel the weight of his ancestors pressing down, whispering through the soil through his veins, reminding him of debts never paid. That night, Thomas dreamed of faces he didn't recognize. Men, women, children, all with the same hollow eyes and twisted expressions of betrayal. They stood in the parlor, surrounding the chair, pointing at him in silence. When he woke, his sheets were damp with sweat, and the faint scent of smoke lingered in the room. He tried to leave the next morning, packed his truck, started the engine, drove halfway down the dirt road before he saw them. Figures standing among the trees, not clear enough to see faces, but close enough to know they were watching. He blinked, and they were gone. He turned back toward the house. The windows were lit, every single one of them, but he hadn't turned a single light on. He told himself it was madness, exhaustion, paranoia. But then a thought crossed his mind, sharp and coldy. What if the curse isn't on the house? What if it's in the blood? If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline? By the 7th day, Thomas had stopped fighting the feeling that something inside the house was learning him, memorizing his footsteps, adjusting its breathing to match his. The floors no longer creaked when he moved, they waited. The whisper no longer came from the walls, it came from within his thoughts, threading through them like ivy through stone. He began hearing the name Joseph in his dreams, over and over. Sometimes whispered, sometimes screamed. One night, he found himself standing in the parlor again, though he couldn't remember waking. The furniture had shifted. The chair from the cellar now stood in the center of the room. Its presence felt heavy, expectant. When he moved closer, the faint glow of candlelight flickered across the walls, though he hadn't lit any candles. The air thickened with the scent of iron. The floorboards beneath him pulsed once, a deep, slow beat, as if the ground itself had a heart. And then, for the first time, he saw them clearly, the Dawsons. A circle of figures fading in and out of shadow, surrounding him in silence. Faces pale, hollow-eyed, half-formed. Among them, one stood closer, more solid, the edges of his suit and hands visible through the haze. Joseph Dawson, the man who built the house. Thomas tried to speak, but Joseph only shook his head. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. His voice was calm, regretful, almost human. "The soil remembers, the house remembers, and now it remembers you." Thomas demanded to know what he meant, what was beneath the house, why his family had died one by one. But Joseph only looked down at the floor. "We stole this land," he said softly. "We took from those who had nowhere else to rest. We built our home on their bones. And the land took something in return, every firstborn, every generation." Thomas stepped back, shaking his head. "You're dead," he whispered. Joseph's eyes lifted to meet his. "So are you." When the candles went out, when Thomas came to, it was morning. He was sitting in the parlor chair, dirt under his fingernails, his shirt torn and soaked through with something dark. He stumbled to his feet and looked at his reflection in the mirror, the same old mirror he'd tried to take down. But the face looking back wasn't his. It was Joseph's. And Joseph smiled. The days that followed bled into each other, time warping in the way it does when a mind starts to fracture. Thomas wasn't sure how long he'd been in the house anymore. The clocks had stopped. The sky outside never quite settled into day or night. Sometimes he'd hear laughter from rooms that didn't exist, doors creaking open where there were no doors before. He tried burning the photographs, thinking it might sever whatever connection bound him to that place. But as the flames ate through the edges, the air filled with a sickly sweetness, and the smell of burning flesh. He dropped them and stumbled back, only to see the faces in the photographs reappear, their features twisting, eyes widening as if they were waking up inside the fire. That's when he realized the truth wasn't buried under the floor. It was buried inside him. He found the family Bible again on the dining table, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. A passage had been circled in red, written in a trembling hand not his own. "The sins of the father shall visit the children unto the 3rd and 4th generation." The letters began to bleed, seeping through the thin paper, until it formed a single, repeated word beneath the verse: return. He began hearing voices not just at night, but in daylight, fragments of prayers, children crying, the steady rhythm of shovels digging in earth. He'd cover his ears, but it didn't matter. The sound came from inside his skull, vibrating against bone. On the 10th night, He decided to end it. He gathered what little he owned, set the gasoline by the walls, and struck a match. The flame hissed, small but determined. For a moment, it seemed the fire would take the house, but then the wind shifted. The match went out, and the house exhaled, a long, low breath that extinguished the flame like it was never there. In the faint reflection of the window, Thomas saw movement behind him. The ghosts of his family stood once again in a circle, Joseph at the center. But this time, they weren't silent. Their mouths opened, speaking in unison. Blood remembers. Flesh repays. You have come home. And Thomas understood what the plaque in the cellar had meant. For the one who must atone, it wasn't a warning, it was an instruction. He descended into the cellar one last time, the air colder than he'd ever felt it. Frost crawled up the walls despite the season, and the lantern's flame barely held on, bending toward the earth as though drawn to something beneath. The sound of his own heartbeat filled the silence, slow and uneven, each pulse echoing against the damp stone. The chamber waited for him. The chair still stood at its center, the shackles gleaming faintly in the flickering light. He approached it as a man approaches confession, not with fear, but with resignation. He knew now what his ancestors had done. Joseph Dawson had not merely stolen land. He had desecrated a sacred place, buried the remains of the people he had displaced, and sealed them beneath his own home. To hide it, to own it, to silence them. And now, the land wanted something back. Thomas ran his hands along the carvings on the walls, feeling the names press into his skin. They felt warm, pulsing slightly, as if alive. His fingers stopped on one he hadn't noticed before. Thomas J. Dawson. The earth shifted beneath his feet. He fell to his knees, shaking, whispering apologies into the soil. The whisper that answered wasn't cruel. It sounded tired, hollow, ancient. It told him the blood debt could only end when one Dawson willingly gave himself back to the ground. No more running. No more return. Thomas sat in the chair. The metal was cold at first, then warm as if something beneath the house began to stir. The shackles closed around his wrists and ankles, not by force, but by consent. His eyes blurred, the lantern's light dimming until there was nothing but blackness. For a moment, he thought he saw them. The ones buried below, standing around him, their faces no longer twisted in anger but peace. The earth breathed once, deeply, like a great sigh. Then the room went still. When the sheriff found the house weeks later, it was empty. The cellar had collapsed, swallowed by the ground. No sign of Thomas, just the chair, unshackled, and a new name carved into the wall beside the others. Thomas J. Dawson, 1982, the last of the line. Years passed, and the Dawson house became nothing more than a local legend, a ruin overgrown with weeds, swallowed by silence. The town stopped talking about it. Children dared each other to touch its gate, but none ever crossed it. The road leading there faded from maps, erased by time and memory, as though the land itself wanted to forget. But forgetting is a mercy the earth rarely grants. In 1998, a real estate company purchased the property, unaware of its past. They sent a surveyor to assess the land. He didn't last an hour. When the rescue team found him, he was sitting on the front porch, eyes open, whispering a single phrase over and over again. It's still breathing. He never worked again. No one knows what truly became of Thomas Dawson. Some say his body lies beneath the house, encased in the roots of the oak that grew up through the foundation. Others claim the curse finally ended with him, that his sacrifice closed the wound his ancestors had opened. But those who've stood near the old property swear they can still hear something moving beneath the soil on quiet nights, like a slow heartbeat deep underground. The Dawsons built their home on stolen earth, and in doing so, they built a monument to their own undoing, a legacy of denial, of arrogance, of blood that refused to wash clean. The house didn't haunt them out of cruelty. It haunted them because it remembered what they chose to forget. Every voice silenced, every grave disturbed, every debt left unpaid. And maybe that's the truest curse of all. Not ghosts or demons, but memory itself. The kind that never dies, never forgives, never stops whispering through generations. The kind that waits. So if you ever find yourself driving through rural Kentucky and see a dirt road with no name, don't follow it. Don't listen when the wind starts to sound like voices. And if you see a house, white paint long gone, porch half collapsed, windows black as the grave, keep driving. Because some homes don't want new owners. They just want the old ones to come back. And the ground, once awakened, never forgets.